Welcome to the Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard, where continuing education meets convenience. Lisa brings therapists practical conversations with expert guests who share tools, techniques, and insights to enrich your practice. Whether you're on a walk, commuting, or cooking dinner, you can earn continuing education contact hours and stay inspired without sitting through endless recorded trainings. Visit lisamustard.com to join the CE membership and keep your professional growth as seamless as your favorite podcast.
Meet Berries, the AI-powered scribe that writes your therapy notes for you. Secure and private with no recordings stored and EMR ready with one click. Join over 8,000 clinicians, saving time and staying present in sessions. And right now, save $50 off your first month with code TherapyShow50. Berries, so you can focus on care, not notes.
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of The Therapy Show. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard, and I'm so thrilled to welcome Dr. Doug Novotny to the podcast. Welcome, Doug. It is great to have you.
Hi, Lisa. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Will you share with our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do and how you help?
Sure. I'm a licensed psychologist on the West Coast, and I'm also trained in clinical psychology. So I think that's what brought us together is that I have this interest in trying to make sense of what's happening in culture wars, using the wisdom from the training in cultural psychology and applying it to our field. So I do a private practice, and I also have an LLC oriented towards trying to do psychoed about this period of time in our society.
Awesome. Awesome. And how long have you been a psychologist? How many years have you been in practice?
Yeah, good question. I'm old enough to forget. I think I've been doing it 25 years if you count all the clinical work training and such, and I've been licensed for maybe 15 now.
Okay, nice.
During that licensure period, been doing training as well, supervision, doing practicum training and classes, and now doing a continuation of that.
Yeah, so you have a course actually. Will you share a little bit about the course that's this weekend and what's coming for you?
So currently, not just what's new is that this is for licensed professionals, right? I am offering a continuing education course, a CE. And so that's through FAIR, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. I guess you'll put info in notes if people are interested. It's a 3-hour course that aims to do just this, is to integrate culture and psychology and make sense of things, what I call as without the corrosion of identity politics. Because it seems to me that so many of the CEs offered come from a very identity politics or left-leaning modality that I think is a mistreatment of culture in our field. So it's available on live webinar Saturday the 28th, also April 8th, and then on home study pre-recorded right now and until April 18th.
Okay, so you have a couple options. You can come live this Saturday, or you have another option in April, or you can do the home study. And you are APA approved, is that right?
Yeah, my LLC is APA approved sponsor for CEs, and I know a lot of other types of therapists can get CE credit under the APA. I don't know who, you'd have to know for yourself. Or just if for interest sake. For CEs, yeah, it's APA approved.
I know you might have some other trainings in the future. You have a newsletter or something people can sign up for if they want to learn more?
I have a website coming. Right
Okay.
now, website is just a landing page. Okay. So for a future Substack and that kind of thing. So it's yourpositivesome.com.
Okay, great.
And if anybody went there, they could just enter the email and they get updated soon when that goes live, which will be in the next month.
Okay, perfect. I'll put the link in the show notes for people who want to stay on top of what it is that you're doing. I know we're going to talk about navigating culture and value-based differences. So
Yeah.
it's such a big topic. And tell us, where would you start with that? What would you like to say to therapists out there regarding that?
Yeah. First of all, you know that I'm affiliated with the Open Therapy Institute, TI. I would say everybody should go join. We need to join up. You don't have to be politically aligned exactly. You have to be interested in openness and open-mindedness. So that's one important thing practically. Conceptually, theoretically, I would say that I have an article there, right, that culture is something that I think has been grossly misunderstood in our field. And I call it a fetish version of culture, the way identity politics talks about identity traits, demographic traits, and Black culture, white culture, and talks about people as if that's multiculturalism. And obviously, traits like that can matter a lot, but they are not what I would call deep. They can have deep resonances. They can have deep meanings to people, but they themselves are not deep. They're very superficial, right? Descriptions of material. That contrasts with the way I was taught culture at University of Chicago, where I was taught by basically anthropologists. I have a lot of overlap with Jonathan Haidt. Many people will know him. because he actually was trained by the same guy at Chicago as I was. We overlapped a year. I was just coming in. He was a postdoc. And so I use his model a lot. And the idea is that culture is a very deep thing. It's as profound as can be. It played out in everyday interactions. And it's like what you picture an anthropologist going to a village or another country, right? And trying to study everyday activities and marriage ritual, life and death, how people eat, who's intimate in the family and who's not, how wars are started. All the interesting stuff of life, that culture, not skin tone.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And so with that kind of contrast set up, I have been shocked and horrified by the way the clinical psychology field fails to grasp that and talks about culture in this very, what I call a flat way, which I consider to be dehumanizing. And so I've been watching this and talking back to it a little bit. That's what the CE course is about. It's like trying to take Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory, which is a really profound model of what morals and culture is, and some varied perspectives that I have on building upon that and applying it to how we do it in the field.
Okay. I know a little bit about Jonathan Haidt. I think I get his Substack, especially when it comes to like social media and phones. I'm really dialed into what he says there. I look to that as I have children.
So his recent work is on, that happiness and screens and social media and kids, very important stuff.
Yeah.
A little bit earlier work is on this thing called moral foundations theory. So an example of how that comes together is that there are, in the first iteration of his model, there were 5 major morals. Care, see if I can get them all on memory.
Okay.
So it's care, fairness, authority, loyalty, and sanctity. And the interesting thing is that in our field and in what would be a more secular or a more liberal approach that many in our field tend to adopt, they only embrace 2 of those 5 morals. And in other countries throughout history, more religious type people, more conservative type people within our society embrace all. So he's interested in that. And he's not a conservative guy, but he's concerned that this is called to him a conservative advantage. So
Okay.
I'm not so much to have a partisan debate about who's right, but to realize that this is a huge gap that liberal people and people in our field tend not to recognize. And there are a lot of things that conservatives don't recognize either, which I talk about in the class. But the idea is to take this and try to use that structure to open eyes on all sides of the spectrum to what it is we're not understanding about ourselves and each other, and how we often just do a crosstalk because we're using certain moral lenses to make an argument or to explain our feelings about things that are important, like raising children, all the political stuff, but also a lot of very clinical. And we use those moral lenses without understanding them. And that if we could have a good understanding of what they are, we could talk much more intelligently to one another, even when we disagree.
That sounds fascinating. How does it work? Can you give us an example of maybe how a therapist who uses all 5 morals would work versus someone who maybe is only using 2?
Yeah. Okay. Let's take an example where first we recognize an area of a blind spot for conservatives who are using all 5.
Okay.
Because that's obviously stereotypical stuff sometimes, or better, prototypical stuff. It's true. It's not just a stereotype like it's wrong.
Right.
Prototype, but it doesn't represent everybody, right? And there's tons of overlap. That being said, a conservative, on average, would embrace all 5 morals, but would do so with a certain model of thinking. How do conservatives speak in this country? We often hear them resisting, let's say, a systemic interpretation of things. Systemic racism. I focus on the individual. Fine. But what a conservative, and even it's a very reasonable argument, right? I'm not saying it's wrong, I use it myself. But a conservative who embraces all 5 fails to realize that those other morals that conservatives embrace are systems. In other words, it doesn't have to be your enemy a system. Your conservatives tend to be used to that argument being used against them. But it's not true that they have to reject systems entirely. In fact, conservatives embrace them. The easiest example to grasp is the family, right? Conservatives would quickly say, oh yes, family first, right? We value family, attend as a group. In the field, we call it family systems therapy for a reason, because families are systems. And so that's just one example of a kind of blind spot for conservatives. And on the other side, right, if you're dealing with somebody who's more liberal oriented or just embracing, say, the ethic of care or of fairness, which are the first two moral lenses that liberals tend to easily endorse. It's also true that liberals do embrace these other morals, in my view, but they don't acknowledge it. And so in course, we talk about this in more detail. This is what we call in psychotherapy a disavowal, right? If you embrace something and you act upon it and it drives your feelings, that's important to you. But if then you say, oh, no, that's not me, that's a kind of a discontinuity which therapists become very interested in, because they know that when you're not acknowledging what actually does drive you, it leads to all sorts of problems. I've given one example of how conservatives do that. Liberals tend to do that about these three moral foundations that they say that they don't endorse, but do move them.
Mm.
So that's the whole course is built on a 4-dimensional model. And this is the first dimension of 4, is to recognize this as a kind of a blind spot that narrows focus on things and blinds you to the other aspect of moral life that is still important to you and that you can open up your eyes to.
I really like this kind of stuff. This is like where I get excited about the clinical work and about understanding myself and how I show up in the world. So I really can get on board with what you're sharing and what you're saying. I'm always really big on understanding people's values and what do they value. And morals, of course, fall into that. But when I know what my values are and my morals, and let's say I talk a good game, but I don't walk the walk, I'm not walking in alignment. I'm not walking in congruence. I'm not being congruent, and that drives me batty. And maybe that's part of my personality that I need to work on. But it's like this. It's just this part of me that I can't have that for myself. It's like I know right and wrong for myself, and I have to be congruent. And that can get me in trouble sometimes because it's my personality. I'm right and wrong. I know that's how I break things up. I think as a therapist, it's really important that we understand that we have to be congruent. Like you can't just say one thing and do another. You have to have that awareness. Do you feel like we've gotten away from that? Maybe we're so quick to put it on other people or to have an opinion or be divided.
It's a major problem, yes.
Yeah.
And I think join with you in a certain way about this kind of making you batty. If you see it in yourself or perhaps in others and you see a contradiction in terms of practicing what you preach, say, or you're just not living up to values, then it bothers you. And that is the kind of thing that we as therapists ought to be really curious about rather than tribalist about. And not, oh, I caught you, you're wrong. But, oh, what is it that there's some whole area of your psyche that you're noticing now that you're being blinded to? Maybe it's an important part of you and we don't know why yet, but let's go there. Let's explore it. I think that kind of irritation or impatience with your own hypocrisy, you could say, or whatever doesn't align, right, is what makes many of us today speak out about what's happening in the field, because there's so much that doesn't make sense and it is contradictory or, as I say, narrow and blinding. And it's certain kinds of people can't tolerate that. And these are the kind of people we need when we're in a kind of a moral panic and the group is just running off the cliff. We need somebody to say, hey, wait. Yeah. And I think that might be who you are in a certain respect. Anyway, I know it is who I am. I really don't like that kind of groupthink going on. I consider it threatening to me and to good thinking and to the society. And so whatever reason in my background that might be true, it is true. And I feel a need to speak up about it. So I don't know if I've answered your question, though, because you were asking about what do we do in treatment or how do we deal with the value, right?
Yeah, that sounds good. You got it.
The idea of morals, yes, I basically synonym with values. I do think it's a problem. Morals turn people off sometimes and they want to say, oh, that's not what we do in our field. I had this argument actually with a very big time therapist who I had the pleasure of talking to recently about this. And he was basically like, no, there's no place for morals in treatment. But he reacted very emotionally and immediately to Jonathan Haidt's research when I presented it. Okay. And for instance, there's this great story that he opens his book with. Example, family dog, beloved family dog, is out in front of the house, gets hit by a car and killed. The family, this will be a disturbing story. So the family reasons to themselves, the dog is dead. Should we just waste it now by burying it or whatever? Maybe we should eat it. And the question, is that morally wrong? And you see this culturally, how people react to it. Most people have a disgust reaction to it. They want to say, oh God, that's horrible. But then to try and explain why it's horrible or why they had that reaction, that's where you get into the value structure, or whether they describe it as a morally bad thing or they try to come up with other reasons. That was the beginning of John's research. So applying them, it's an example of kind of an everyday thing that might happen. Not that people are every day eating their dollars, but they are losing them and they're having emotional reactions to that loss. And they're making a ton of decisions every day about how they have dinner with their children, the rules they enforce, who speaks, who cooks, how you work out disagreements in the family, dating. Those are things that we do every day. These are value judgments. And so in the model, we call them moral, because they have this very powerfully emotionally laden aspect to them that we do link to our beliefs about what's good and bad, not just, oh, that would be useful, right? But it's good or bad. That's moral. So values, moral, fine with me. And so how do we, as therapists, do a good job with this, right? The first thing we do is we notice it, that, hey, this really bothers me. To me, that's counter-transferring. And what you need to then to do is recognize what your value structure is, be interested in your patient's value structure, and find ways to explain that better. Like I just tried to do earlier about moral foundations. There's a lot of ways to do it, but showing an interest in values and not just feelings as disconnected from that, I think is what interests you. And I know that's what the linkage I'm trying to make between this anthropological moral structure and psychotherapy.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I think you explained that really, and I really appreciate giving an example of Jonathan Haidt's work. That's really something to think about for sure.
You said, something like, people often say this, right? I'm not living up to my values, or I'm not doing what I said. I think summarizing you, practicing what I preach. And I can't remember who first said this when I read it years ago, but I love this reversal of that to say, why don't you preach what you practice? And it's a kind of a nice reversal because we live, according to moral foundation theory, right? We live every day, all these detailed things which are heavily morally laden. And if we look at how we live, we're making these decisions without thinking about them, but they reflect our values as we live. And if you can take from that and say, oh, now what does that mean? Example, people will say, oh, marriage doesn't matter, right? Just hook up, have throuples, have children outside of marriage, all the things, people say or don't think they can talk sense about. But if you look at many of those people, they are married. They are living very traditional lives, even though they're speaking about non-traditional values. So if you ask those people, why don't you preach what you're practicing rather than just trying to focus on practicing what you preach? If you're practicing a monogamous, committed relationship where you try to live in a safe neighborhood and raise your children according to certain virtues and values, whatever they are, you don't have to agree with mine. Mm-hmm. Do you have them? Boy, do you. And things like, didn't name them. Why don't you preach that? And many of the people who are living in safe neighborhoods and who are married or at least committed long-term and are raising their children according to these, they're preaching very different values. And so it's a nice challenge in the reverse to say, why don't you preach what you practice?
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. Oh, yeah. No, I have examples floating around in my head of where I see that. But it's fascinating. It really is. It's like you live a certain way, but here you are talking about something that's not what you're doing.
Yeah.
But you think that is the right way, but you don't practice that. It's so weird.
It's very weird.
Yeah, it is weird. And I can think of a lot of examples. And
Rob Peterson talks about luxury beliefs. This idea that you can elevate your social status these days, not just by having money or doing a lot of things that traditionally have been able to show status, but in present day, kind of laptop class elite, meaning-based professional people. They can establish and raise their status by having certain beliefs that they promulgate. But they're luxury beliefs. They're beliefs that if they lived by them would do them no good. And the classic one is defund the police of recent years, right? People who say that usually are not in areas where police defunding would impact them enormously to reduce that risk. And you didn't believe actually that the police were your primary risk, but maybe the drug dealers on the corner are, and you wouldn't say that. Maybe you still believe in police reform in a certain way. Fine. but you would not be saying defund them.
Yeah.
That's, I think, an example of his luxury belief, which fits in this model.
And we see that in Hollywood a lot. That happens. Just thinking about what happened. I don't watch the award shows anymore just because I just don't watch them anymore, or watch.
Right, tired of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I just find, can we just get back to making movies and not having a soapbox and being political, because it just ruins it. So what do you make of this when you hear therapists? Because I hear it a lot. Therapy is political. And I don't agree with that statement at all. If I wanted that to be the case, I would have gone to grad school for political science. I don't. So what do you think?
Right. It's a great question. I mean, I think there's sort of two answers that I think will make sense. That I think therapy is not or should not be political. It is increasingly political.
Yeah.
I think that therapists now are being trained to be political, or major organizations that I think should know better are advocating that it be political, social justice, therapy, that kind of stuff. To me, it's an abdication of our responsibility to be not imposing our values or morals on the people we work with. So that can be true. And I say it is. Just my opinion. Sounds like we agree. But it gets a little more complicated, doesn't it, when we say, as I'm saying, that values are laden within everyday activities that we do, including what we would call mental health.
Yeah.
And so how do we bracket that somehow, or recognize it as true without imposing or becoming political? We should not be political actors. But I do think we have to have a curiosity about the fact that politics do drive people, right? And that these days we hear it enormously in sessions, or even if it's not overtly political. Who'd you vote for? What do you think about that topic? Or have you heard about the latest current event? But they may say things that are partisan in ideological or values-based. Women should be paid equally, or defund the police, or any of these things that we could talk about. They're politically in a way, but I'm less interested in the political part. I'm interested in the values part and what it is that's driving people and why they feel so emotional about it. That to me is a good therapist effort, is to see what is it about that topic that has you so hot. And maybe you're in conflict with somebody you care about over it. Or maybe it represents something to you. Maybe you've had an experience directly related to it. Maybe a lot of things. That would be a good, curious move of a therapist, be interested in what drives it. And it can be ideological. It can be values-based, not for the purpose of imposing mine, not for the purpose of getting in a big debate about it.
I was just saying this to somebody the other day, I forget, about how it's not really about the content, it's the process. It's the words are just, they're words, but what's the feeling or the meaning behind the words? And I remember doing this quote unquote game when I was in supervision, that my supervisor would say, the problem isn't the problem. The problem is, did you ever do that?
I haven't heard that particular one. No, go ahead.
Yeah.
Finish. The problem isn't the problem is what?
You'd have to say what you thought. The problem is the thinking, or the problem is the coping, or the problem is the feel. You'd have to really, everybody would have an opinion. And that was group supervision. And it was really, I use it all the time. Like, the problem isn't the problem. The problem is, and it can be a number of things, but it's not the content. The content is the clue to what is really going on.
Yes.
So that's how I look at it. Yeah.
Very nice. So that's why we call it a symptom. Is that if we're really thinking here, as therapists, we don't presume that what people are presenting with, even as they describe their own symptoms, is the thing.
Right.
We don't presume that. We're interested in it, of course. Yeah. Classically in family work, I did a lot of young child work for many years. And people come in, fix my kid.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
They're hitting their neighbor in class. And I'm always saying, okay, we don't want hitting, but I don't assume that's like the problem. This is a way of like really trying to become curious about the deeper meanings of things and the patterns at play. So here's a way of answering your question of a few minutes ago that I don't think I ever got to, is how do you come at the different angle? This thing is so, and it's a kind of pitch for my course too, or just my approach to this, which is that I think we can so often get caught up in this topic or that topic. We can be trying to get the right opinion about one thing, or debating with somebody about any of these topics. I don't know if this is your experience, but it seems to me that this similar problems around culture war stuff and around this partisanship, and people get so activated and some of the nonsense, it pops up in all sorts of topics. It's not just our field. It's all over the place. And so that's a way of saying that in another way, it isn't the topic. It isn't the topic, and it isn't any one topic. I'm wanting to say it's a structure.
Mm.
And the purpose of my talk here is to try to describe what that structure is and to start building a better one. And so back to John Haidt's work, he wrote this great paper in 2012. I think it was originally in the Atlantic, saying, no, not in 2012, but I don't remember the year, but he's saying that since 2012 or so, we have been in a period that he calls uniquely structurally stupid. And so whether it's social media, whether it's ideologies like this one, whether it's a lot of explanations possible, we have a structural stupidity, and he calls it the Tower of Babel. And I think that's very apt metaphor because it's a way that we're not talking to one another, right? We don't have a shared language. And this idea of structure, I think, is so interesting because if you can find a structure to understand why all the topics are crazy, you say, oh, behind all the topics, there's one structure or a few structures, let's say. But whatever those structures are, we have to figure out what they are and not be playing whack-a-mole on this topic. Oh, no, I disagree with you on that. Yeah, we agree on that one. Or whatever. Oh, I finally did 40 hours of online research and now I understand this topic. You got to get behind and figure out what the structure is. And to me, his moral foundations theory is one example of an intelligent structure that can combat this structural stupidity. And then I built this, what I call a four-dimensional lens, which is trying to also give a kind of structure so we can understand why you think everything seems so stupid and crazy. That's my kind of intro.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I go to what's behind it. And it's like
Yeah.
people are afraid. There's fear, there's shit, there's all those feelings is it the five feelings? Is that how does it work? Like you can boil it down to five feelings that are really
Mhm.
driving people. Would
Yeah.
that make sense in your model?
Huh. I think it would, but I'm
Okay.
not sure exactly what the point is yet, that fear is one of them. So we want to
Yeah.
know feelings are there driving people. And naturally, it would be just good clinical work that we would be interested in those feelings.
Mhm.
The harder part is if we have this structurally stupid thing happening, and if we keep seeing the same feelings and issues, I guess the question is, like you're saying, what do they represent?
Yeah.
And so let's say, like, what is woke, right? Try to answer it this way. A part of woke, originally by the definition, is that you're awakening to injustice and oppression. Maybe something you didn't recognize before. That's, to me, a very important clinical experience. If you could go a long time feeling that everything was okay, or you had your place in this world or in your family, say, and then you say, wait, all these people are against me. I didn't know it. Maybe the system is aligned against that terrible feeling. I think we as therapists, have to be good at grasping that without necessarily buying into a certain ideology that's associated with it. And so that would be an example of getting to the feeling that could be expressed through an ideology. So this person is out there in the street and fine, maybe they believe some things, but I'm also interested in, wait, what's going on? How did that happen for you? Not in society only.
Yeah. And I think part of it too is people just want to be validated. They get on social media and they post something or they have an opinion and they want to put it out there because I have everybody has a platform now and I want to use my platform. And it's just so many people with platforms. It's overwhelming. So I think people just they want validation. Maybe they're not getting it in their relationships or they're not being accepted. I don't know, but I feel like something is happening to people where they're not maybe getting it in their family or their relationships. And so they go outside and they go, oh, I'll just look on social media. And then they scroll, oh, I like what this person is saying, but they're getting sound bites or they're just getting snippets of information. And it starts to mess with you because you're spending so much time on it. And
Right.
I don't know where I'm going with this, Doug. I'm just like riffing here.
Well, all this stuff is about that. I
Yeah.
mean, it fits right with John's work, right? Idea of social media and people being on screens and not really getting. Here's how I would reframe it slightly for
Okay.
you in terms of this model, is that what you're talking about is a superficial and a passing, moment by moment, TikTok approach to feeling important and a wish to be famous or to be, as you said, validated.
Mm-hmm. Affirmed. Yeah.
And again, that's a deeply psychological thing, which is important to us or ought to be. Doesn't make sense, or we shouldn't necessarily embrace it in an ideology. We don't validate things that we disagree with. We don't validate things that are hurtful. We can validate that another person feels it, and that it might be important to them. It's not the same as validating the way people use the term these days. What they want is to be agreed with. And so if we're going to have a conversation as two people who each have dignity in our own mind, we're going to naturally disagree. So we can validate each other in that sense and actually be having a human connection. But what is this wish for fame validation? What is this issue of the powerful emotional driver that's causing people to hop from topic to topic and to have really strong feelings about it and feel righteous? That's another answer to your earlier question about what is with this moral stuff and the values. Because what I feel is that people now, one of the things people feel is alienated and another is demoralized. I think our field is demoralized. And that's what I'm trying to do with this moral structure, is to remoralize it, not to become moralistic, but to become morally mature, or somehow to get that values do matter here. See, the double entendre is intentional here, demoralized, right? So you feel demoralized when there's no morals in the interchange and the narratives that run our field, but they do exist. So example, people who are out there in the street or who are fighting on this culture war stuff, I think that they're highly moral. They're very moralistic. They're drawing upon justice. What else? Even just like racism, very interested in social equities, the white supremacy, a lot of topics that are, my God, these things are really morally laden. And they ought to be important to all of us at some level. But the point is that this is driving people. And they feel good that they're a part of a movement that might make things better. And then if we're over here saying, but have you considered the statistics of blah, blah, blah? We're not meeting the moment. We're not engaging at the level that it's being addressed by others. And that's doing two things wrong. One is it's failing to recognize that they're hot. And if we just come in all cold and cool, we seem like we don't care. We do care. Also, we're failing to capture that whatever our side of this is, you and me, I assume we agree, but whatever my side of it, whatever I feel has value. So let's say, I believe in justice too. I believe in equal justice under law. That's a very strong moral case for the West. So it's not that I don't want to give up justice as something which I consider to be extremely important. All I'm doing is saying that we have different views of justice. Let's talk it out. But if I don't act and realize and express as if I feel that the ground under me is value laden and even moral, then I get blown away in the wind. And so I think having a language for how this is a values-based opinion and even doing psychotherapy is heavily values laden. Then I think we're not doing it well. And we're going to lose. So nice reminder of that is Andrew Hart's reminded us of this lately in some of his interviews with Leslie Elliott. He says, he reminds us the fact that psyche means soul. So since when did we forget that we're actually doing the work, soul work? It doesn't have to mean that we adopt a certain religious viewpoint to get that we're in something which is deep. And this view of culture, the identity politics model, I'm calling flat. So that's my summary of the first two dimensions in my course. We're moving from a flat view, identity politics of demographic trait, to a deep one of moral. And how do we do that intelligently with a clinical lens?
Yeah. I can't wait to sign up for this CE course. It sounds like something I would really be interested in and definitely is useful in the work that I do. So let's say, what do you think, besides understanding your model that one would get when they attend your training, what else would they expect to learn or walk away with after coming to your continuing education course?
Yeah, so I think the model itself, or this structure that we're trying to talk about, the conversation we're having now, to me, that is itself something important to walk away with, is that you feel oriented.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I believe that one of the big problems we therapists have is that we're disoriented to this whole lens of what I call structure of understanding things. And so you're playing the whack-a-mole, and it's very disorienting. So I hope that this orients people and it gives a new language, the moral foundation theory, language and narratives and concept for how to talk about this. So there's one specific thing which comes up later in the course, which is this idea of disgust, the feeling of disgust. And it's one that I don't hear people talking about much when they're training psychotherapy, but I think it's very important. And so it happens to be the downside of the fifth moral lens, which is sanctity or purity. And the downside is degradation, pollution, and disgust. Disgust is the emotion that goes along with being degraded in this opposite of sanctified way. And disgust comes up in therapy a lot. And people, though, will tend, if they're only looking at the first two moral lenses, will talk about it in terms of safety and trauma, which is fine, right? We think that's important. But what we're failing is to get that fifth moral lens, which cares a lot about sanctity and disgust and degradation. And so that's just one very specific example of how over time a person can, I think, increase their comfort with that language and all of the narratives and the concepts which go along with what disgust means. And one extremely obvious example, which everybody already knows in the field, but probably doesn't think about this way, is Gottman's research with couples and marital work. Right? We know disgust is very important if you're doing couples work. It's a very bad sign for a couple. Here's moral foundations theory speaking back to them and saying, oh, we know some things to do about that. We need to be interested in what that is, and we need to be thinking about what is sanctified to you, what is pure. These are antidote to disgust. So that's just one example of how our field, I think, tends to swing very heavily towards safety and trauma and fairness and miss this whole set of narratives and values that people do have, but they don't know how to talk about, especially not in therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm fascinated by this topic. So thank you so much for going over all of this.
Yeah, I hope so.
I'm hoping other therapists will be interested in signing up for your course and learning more. And I'm hoping that you'll have more courses down the road, not just the ones that are happening this spring, but down the road. So is there anything else you want our listeners to know?
Oh gosh, not now, except just to say that I find it, we say this a lot, but I think it has to be repeated, that it is so relieving to talk with somebody like you who is interested in this stuff and is building something. I tell you that before we started recording, I think what you're doing is also an antidote to all these problems, because you're building a business, you're building CE courses, right? You're out there. That is the antidote, one of the many antidotes to the alienation a person feels when things don't make sense and you're in a structurally stupid period of time.
Yeah.
It's corrosive. And building is the antidote to corrosion. So I think what you're doing is vital. And talking with people is too. I've noticed that, kind of just a personal anecdote of this, is that in a few recent years that I've started to actually speak out about this and build this LLC and everything, and my thinking has improved a lot. I went for many years not having much in the way of talking with people about this or really thinking about it and expressing it. And naturally, I was closing in on myself. So for anybody out there, realize that it is bad for your soul if you're not thinking this stuff through, finding people to talk with about it, and building stuff.
Thank you for saying that. I hadn't really considered that, but now looking back on the progression of my CE business, it makes sense. The topics that I started with, and then the topics that I'm leaning towards now, and just how it's played out it's really interesting. I like what you're saying about get out there and build something. I think part of the issue is we just got a lot of time on our hand to get on these platforms and write or complain and moan and get in these Facebook groups and ask questions. And it's too much access to information versus and I'm just thinking about being a therapist, and when I was going through supervision, like, I'm so glad we didn't have all these Facebook groups where I could see ask all these different people, how would you approach this client? It would be so overwhelming where I just stuck with my supervisor. I stuck with my supervision group, and we all had different opinions on things, but yet it all worked out. And nowadays it just seems like you've got so many options for asking for advice. And it's overwhelming. It's just too, I feel like it's just,
If the information was going to solve all our problems,
yes. Oh,
and
right.
we solved them a long time ago.
That's it.
And
Yeah,
so
perfect.
this is where like your values back to that is a hierarchy in terms of prioritizing what I put in the information important. And when do I spend my time out there exploring, trying to learn something new? Am I sitting quietly with my supervisor and introspecting over what I do as a therapist? Right. And that's what you were taught, and it's so important. And maybe that's lacking now.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time, and we'll put all the links in the show notes, and maybe you'll come back. And I'd love for you to maybe do a pod course for us one day and be able to offer credit. That'd be great. Thank you so much for being here. This has been awesome.
Thank you, Lisa.
Please note that the Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice. Always consult with your therapist, doctor, or physician before implementing any suggestions from the show. The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard is edited and engineered by Chelsea Weaver. If you're looking to start a podcast or ready to take the editing off of your plate, be sure to visit chelseaweaverpodcasting.com. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine. Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover all the pod courses and other continuing education offerings. And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.